Hi, Heather. Thank you so much, and welcome to our podcast.
It's wonderful to meet you. Thank you so much for having me here.
So, Heather, how did you get onto the path of spirituality?
Well, when I was about 17 years old, I've told this before, but when I was 17 years old, I was a God seeker. And I had this insatiable urge to just search, like really strong. I I would read in libraries 10 books a day. I sought in the city mentors, and I was searching. But after a period of time, it was like I hit a wall, and I felt like something was wrong. Like everything I looked at, there was something missing. And so at one point, I put my head against the dormitory wall and I just began to cry. And I said, God, if there is a God, show me a real teacher. And I said that with sincerity in my heart, and I had tears in my eyes. And it was immediately after that that I felt this strong inner guidance, this nudge to leave the art college I was in, which I was doing great. I loved it there, um, and go to a science university in the Poconos. And the first couple days I was there, I went in the college library and I just closed my eyes and I said, inwardly, I said, what am I ready for now? And it felt as though my hand were guided by the VARDAN divine spirit right to a book. It's the path I practice now. And when I touched this book and opened it, I didn't just read words, but I suddenly had an out of body experience where I had a flash of this white, vast white universe that went on into eternity, like thousands and thousands of miles of just this endless, sparkling, brilliant whiteness and a pure sound. And I could feel the presence of God. This is a heaven called the Anami Loch, deep in the God worlds. But then years later, a number of years later, when I practiced it, I practiced out of body travel for many years. Years later, I had a deeper experience of God. I mean, I could talk about that now or share it later, but that all of that opened me up to out of body travel, and it's it's basically the purpose of out of body travel is to return to God while living. Out of body experience, it's sort of like there are a lot of people that know about near death experiences, which which are basically, a person has a traumatic experience where they're hit by a car or something else that's really traumatic, and because of that, it literally sort of knocks them out of the physical body, so that they're having this experience where they can kind of have a psychological distance from their physical body. They're outside of it. But when in out of body travel, you're learning how to do that consciously, meaning a person doesn't have to get hit by a car in order to have that divine experience of leaving the body and touching heaven and moving towards God, that it can be a choice. And one thing related to that is there's a double standard about that sort of thing. Do you know, like how like a lot of people believe that training, like training in sports or training in career, is very important, like a priority. Yeah, and but related to spirituality, there's a double standard where there's this notion that you should just have like an out of body experience, and or you should just like go to church, and nothing else is required. That it's not really, it doesn't really have the same weight. There's almost this notion that physical world training is very valuable, but spiritual training is sort of like not important. But my husband and I, we've been studying out of body travel and teaching it for 29 years. And so after a period of time, there are these 9 steps or levels that people go through to higher states of consciousness, to reach self-realization and God realization and actual Vardan spiritual mastership. And over the years, for several decades, we trained and we went through all of those steps. And it's just like, I mean, the analogy for it is grade school. When you go into grade school, you learn certain fundamentals. You learn how to write your name, you learn the alphabet, and then you move on to more advanced things like writing sentences, or going from crawling on the floor to walking and then running. So it's the same thing with spirituality. When you're going through the different levels or stages, it's like a process of unfoldment. and so that's a big part of out of body travel is for myself. It's been getting the proper training and moving through those different levels of consciousness, because there are different planes, different multiple layers of heaven. I remember one time when I was in my earlier years, I was sitting in a hotel conference room. There was a crystal chandelier sort of glittering overhead, and there were just the soft voices of people whispering. And I just closed my eyes and I started to do a visualization. And in the visualization, I imagined that I just imagined that I chanted a high vibration name for God, and then I imagined that I was in this dark, foggy woods, very dense and dark. And inside the woods was also a house that was dark and foggy inside too. So, and then I imagined that there was a hose, like a giant hose, like the trunk of an elephant, that started to suck the fog out, the darkness out. And I was just playing around, just imagining this. But then what was kind of shocking or startling was in the next moment, all of a sudden it was no longer I that was guiding the visualization, but all of a sudden Divine Spirit took over and it was going by itself. And what ended up happening was the fog started to be completely sucked out of the house and the woods. And it was almost like all of the walls, like all 4 walls of the house, suddenly they just vanished. It was almost like they were made of glass. And in all directions, instead of the dark woods and the dark house, all I could see for thousands and thousands of miles was just this endless, vast landscape, fields of pure light that just went on and on into eternity. And this holy melody, this heavenly sound. And there was this feeling of knowingness and this love of God. And I felt like so joyful, peaceful, and uplifted. And there was serenity. And I knew that I was in the pure positive God worlds, which is the first heaven of Jivan Mukti, which means spiritual freedom. That was an early experience I had. And I was just blown away. The level of upliftment, I felt so free. But first I have to say that what some people don't know is that sometimes when we visit a heaven, like I visited these different God worlds, I was just a visitor. But the real goal of out-of-body travel is to train with the spiritual traveler to not just be a visitor, but to be a permanent resident. Like that's your home, like where you live there. It's sort of like that saying, my heart is in heaven, but my feet are on earth. It's that notion, because you're training. First you put on the training wheels, you're riding the tricycle and it's got the training wheels on the side. But then eventually the training wheels come off and you're just riding the bike. And what that is it's like we do spiritual exercises, they're the training wheels. But then, and the master's writings, those are the training wheels and books. But then eventually you take the training wheels off and you're just riding. You're your consciousness is in heaven while your feet are on earth. It's like, it's called dual awareness, like dual meaning two places at the same time. But it's sort of like when someone has a near-death experience, they're experiencing a miracle. Like, this is a miracle from God. But it's really like an invitation. Do you take that invitation and just stuff it back in your pocket and hang it on your wall, or do you use it as an admission ticket to get to the next higher level? And that's that's my focus.
What was so unique about your relationship with your husband, Alan, before he died and went to heaven?
Alan G and I both, for 29 years, actually 29 years, both we practiced advanced form of out-of-body travel for decades before we met each other. And then we met each other later in life, and we both loved God deeply and love God deeply. And the moment we met, we got together and we immediately were helping each other like blazes to try to reach our spiritual dreams, self-realization, and God realization, VARDAN mastership. And it was really beautiful. He had and has such a raging sense of humor. And he has such a deep love of God. But it was just very funny because well, we studied a lot we did out-of-body travel together, and we were also spiritual teachers together. So we'd often, write books, spiritual books, or do out-of-body travel, or for fun, we look at past lives together.
So you mentioned that in heaven, your husband gave you messages, laughter, protection, spiritual guidance, love, and help. Can you talk about any of those experiences?
Alan, at first, before Alan died, actually, a week before Alan died, I just suddenly, everywhere I went, I would see puppies. I go to the grocery store, puppies. I go to the parking lot, puppies. I go to other places, more puppies. It was because he knows that I love puppies, and he was basically trying to comfort me. But even before that, I think it was a month or two before that, I was driving in the car and I was feeling very, very miserable because I couldn't bear seeing him sick. It was too much pain to me to see him suffer like that. And with everything going on in the world, a part of me wished I could just vanish. And so I was driving my car and suddenly I fainted. And the next thing I knew, I woke up and the car looked like it was driving itself. and it literally, the moment we were driving 65 miles an hour, the moment the left lane opened up, the car steered itself into that lane and into the middle meridian and just slowed like at the ice capades to a perfect stop. And when I got home, I told Alan about this, and he said, you wanted to leave and you manifested that. He said, don't do that again. So, you're right. I shouldn't do that. I should to be more positive. And he told me that it was the master's protection, because in my path, and also he was the master, so he was the living VARDAN master, and the master's protection is basically as a channel of God, just like the way a Christian will find that they're protected by angels, or depending on the person's, because how can I put this? God can only show us or reach out to us in the way that we allow in our reality, and so and so his protection came to me when I was in that urgent situation. I could have perished in the car accident, but instead the master drove the car, the VARDAN drove the car, divine spirit. So when Alan G was alive, he didn't like wedding rings just because in past lives he remembered past lives as slaves. And so because of that, we didn't have a wedding ring. But then I bought us, those glow in the dark gummy wedding rings, and it would glow like red and purple and blue and yellow. He said that was okay. But then after he died, I was surprised because all of a sudden, out of nowhere, I find this gold wedding ring, and he says to me, I should have married you on the inner planes. I should have married you while I was living. I mean, we were married, but it wasn't like a normal way. And I thought that was so funny. Usually people don't, the one you love doesn't give you a wedding ring after they die.
So you got one after he went to
After he
heaven.
died, it appeared. It was really funny. But when he was alive, we always had all these cutesy, fun, spiritual things. We had a deeply spiritual relationship. We wrote spiritual books together when he was sick. He was like, I can't do it. I'm too sick. I don't feel well. And I said, just lie there and I'll write it down. I'll write things down. And so that's how we wrote Thousands of Visits to Heaven, the Heart of God, and just transcribing what he was saying. And he was able to do it. And we always helped each other that way. We always had each other's back because we had and have a very deep and profound love. Sort of like you treat the other person the way you want to be treated, like their best friend, and you have their back. And so there was a lot of love. We used to write each other like 25 cards on holidays. But anyway, after he died, after he translated from this world in heaven, he would joke around. In the other worlds, he said, in heaven, he said, Heather, now that I'm in heaven, I've lost all the weight, because he was overweight. So, so it was just kind of funny, his sense of humor. But anyway, he also comforted me in the sense of I was in a lot of pain. And because losing him was difficult. And I just recall at one point, every single time I was just about to cry, all of a sudden the phone would ring, and it would be a student calling to comfort me and saying, and so I wouldn't cry. And what that was later on, months later, this student tells me over the phone, he says that because all my students practice out-of-body travel, he says to me that Alanji came to him on the inner planes and said, whenever I was about to cry, he'd say, comfort her. And so then immediately they would call me at the very second that I was going to cry over and over again. So, that was one of the ways he comforted me. And then in terms of protection, I remember at one point, all of a sudden, well, I forgot to say this. He told me from heaven to write a book with him. And actually a mystical person told me that I was destined to write a book with him. That would be the answer to many people's prayers. And that basically it would help certain people's dreams come true, people who wanted to be closer to God. So I started writing this book, every day. I lost my home. I lost him, I lost my home. And so I was living in Tampa, Florida. Sleeping on a cot. And so every day I would look at his picture and close my eyes and meet him in heaven, such as the pure positive God worlds, which are heavens filled with radiant light and sound. And I would meet him, and we would have conversations telepathically, and I would write down what he says for the book. So after many months of this, many months went by, And when I was in a lot of pain, like emotional pain from losing him, he told me, go to the beach. That he wanted me to go to the beach, and he wanted me to do an out of body exercise there so that I could surrender the pain into the ocean, to have it washed away. And he said, I'm going to help you when you go there. So I went there and he did. And it was so funny because I felt all this pain in my heart and all this pain. And then it felt like this enormous burden was lifted off my shoulders. And so it was like he helped give me a healing. It was the healing from the VARDAN, divine spirit, which is this light and sound, the voice of God. But so many things, I can't even name them all. But after that experience, after that out of body experience, my husband came to me and he said, Heather, like the Vardan video opened up, which is the science of the soul records and prophecy. And he said, Heather, one of your specialty areas is you're able to help people in the negative polarity to to make certain leaps. Not everybody is ready for Vardankar per se, but but it's sort of like helping people to, no matter how if somebody thinks that they're unspiritual or not advanced spiritually, or they have preconceptions about themselves that they're not good enough or they don't have enough experiences, that God and divine spirit, the Vardan, can see through the illusion. Like a lot of people identify with their human body, a lot of people identify with their little self, a lot of people identify with their mind and their behavior, their karma. But we're none of those things. Our true self, God can see underneath all of that illusion and see that how special someone is, regardless of their past and regardless of what they think they are. And and when we become more of our God spark, we're like a spark of God. Then we can realize more of our hidden potential. And that's what happened to him, and he revealed to me that I had that specialty area. So related to backtracking to what you were saying, sorry, I'm a little off topic. I realized that you have to give permission for something to exist in your universe. And you're the creator of your reality. And so a part of it is the being able to discipline and control, spiritually mind control your own mind and have control over it. And not, it's sort of like, I guess a good example of this is there was one time where I was watching alternative news too much and it was negative and I was filled with worry and upset. And my husband said, Heather G, trust in God. And I was like, oh, you're right. I have to trust in God. And so I took my attention off of all that and instead placed it more on God and more on filling myself with the Vardan, this light and sound. Because what we fill ourselves with is what we manifest around us. And that's part of the thing related to entities and so forth. To protect yourself, you have to control your mind spiritually. Now, this is not the bad kind of mind control. This is the kind of spiritual mind control where you're being responsible because your thoughts are like creation of your thoughts and your actions. Because right now, this time in history, it's like the negative power and God is testing individuals to see if they can be responsible with their creations. Because it's sort of like they will be experiencing their creations from past lives in the present. Meaning what we create, we also create for ourselves. So when somebody focuses on creating slavery, what are they creating for themselves? If somebody is having negative, dark thoughts about another person, what are they creating for themselves? So, we experience our own creations, and that's going to come to a height in this cycle. So, but that's one of the ways.
So if someone is experiencing a loss of a loved one, what message or advice would you want to give to them?
Well, one of the things that my husband Alan G told me in heaven from the other side is that very often when it comes to spiritual guides and beings, masters, that people have no problem with the idea of communicating with them. But when it comes to a lost loved one, they don't put them in the same category, he said. That that they have to realize that when somebody passes into the other worlds, that they have access to a whole vaster library of consciousness and things that they didn't know before, and that they can help you because they love you. And that's what he was doing for me, and that's how he helped with me to write the book. Because it's like it's sort of like a part of that is learning this inner communication, like telepathy. And it's just like learning out of body travel. It just takes practice, like you're learning the alphabet. The more you practice, the better you get. And before you know, you can read.
So you mentioned these heavens.
I'm not. I'm gonna describe them, but if you look at this, this is like a map. Well, you can see it on the website, VARDANKAR.com. But if you can see, there's like these different levels of heaven, and these lower levels of heaven, like the astral plane, is where many people have near-death experience, and it can be this brilliant light that has a subtle pink and sometimes the sound of thunder. But it's the heaven of emotions. So when somebody has emotional serenity, they may be more mastered at the astral level, like more enlightened at the astral level. The causal plane has a brilliant white light, and it can be tinged subtle orange. My husband had an experience of the causal plane where where basically he saw the Akashic records as these three-dimensional holographic windows that he could peer into past lives and make them fast forward, freeze frame, go back, and view like countless lifetimes, like for millions of lifetimes. And then the mental plane, very few people reach this level. It's a heaven of pure white light that has a subtle blue, and it can be like the sound of running water. And then the etheric is like relates to the unconscious mind. But all of these planes down here, these levels of heaven are, well, this is a physical plane. It has planets, galaxies, and so forth. All these levels are the domain of the negative power. And and then above them is the pure positive God worlds, which are regions of magnificent, brilliant white light and holy sound, because God, how can I put this? Because as soul, God can't descend into the worlds of density and matter. It's we, through out-of-body travel, that project as pure light and sound to return to it. And these higher levels of heaven, the pure positive God worlds, are not very often known by many people. But they're the heavens of self-realization on the soul plane, and God realization and mastership. And really the goal is to return to God. Because like those experiences I shared, I was initially a visitor. Like I visited, where is this? The tsunami lock. But then I had to work and study and practice for years to make my home at the different steps, the higher and higher levels of consciousness. But the main, the one which is most exciting is the home of God, which is the ocean of love and mercy. And it's like a magnificent, it's just magnificent.
So when we die, where do we go? Like which heaven do we go into?
Well, one of the things that the spiritual travelers, Vardan masters, say is that, and I say it too, is that we go to the level of heaven that we've earned while living in the body. So when people just wait until death, then it's sort of like they're not making the most of what they can do while living. So yeah.
And so what can we do to get to the top level? In this
Well,
life, what steps can we take to, so when we die, we get to that level?
well, that's what Alan and I did for years. What we do is we study with the teacher. We in VARDANKAR we call them Mergatma, the living Vardan master. And what that is the reason you use the term living is because some people look to deceased or departed master teachers, or they replace the teacher with a book. And the problem with that is, it's like Pettersask once said, that just the same way an infant needs its mother alive for nourishment, also the spiritual student needs a living master or living teacher in order to be connected on all the different levels so that he can learn. Because it's like this double standard with training, that a person needs training for worldly things like a career, but they don't need training for mastership. And with me, I had to train for many many years, decades, just like my husband did, in out of body travel to this different levels of heaven. And and each student I would progressively have out of body experiences, just like my students do. Each level of those heavens that I was showing you in that chart, there is a wisdom temple, which is like a palace of light or a temple of light and sound, where students leave the body and they study there with these very wise beings, these ancient ones. And the student works with what's called the Mergatma, the living Vardan master, which is an ancient one who has a lot of training to be this sort of conduit. He has what's called the rod of power, which is like a light, like pure light and sound. And what he does is, as the master, Fubbi Quantz, he's actually, some have referred to him as one of the 8 holy immortals of China. And he's the living Vardan master, the Mergatma. I'm the outer master, Vardan master, or teacher. And Fubbi Quantz, basically the Mergatma reconnects the individual with this sound current. The divine spirit is this light and sound, this pure light and sound. And it is the voice of God. And when we go to higher levels of heaven, we'll actually hear a beautiful sound and see a beautiful light. And that's the voice of God, communicating with us. And what happens is that the master, the Mergatma, reconnects the individual with this sound current. And we call this sound current the returning wave. They kind of like riding this wave home to God, the returning wave home to God. And I know this from experience because when I was brand new, like studying my first few years, I remember the master reconnected me with this sound current, where I was literally reconnected with this sound, and it never left me. I mean, I could tell the story about that if you want, but it was magnificent. What happened was, at one point, oh God, part of this is funny. I had found this path and I was following it by myself. I didn't know there was an outer teaching. And I went to a movie, terrible movie called Get Shorty, when I was in my 20s. And while I was watching the movie, it was so horrible that I tuned it out completely, and then I inwardly heard my secret word. Well, then it was shortly after or before then. I was sitting in my room and I put a tape recorder and I was recording my voice. And I said, I said some things. And then when I played it back, I heard this sound, like this beautiful, beautiful sound. And I thought, oh, that's weird. That's not my voice. So I tried again. And it did the same thing. And then I started to get a little frightened, and I said, I hear my voice, I hear my voice. And then my voice played back. But then the next day, I go into the student center and sit in this cubicle with carpeted walls. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, I hear this beautiful, beautiful heavenly sound. It's like it fills like all my beingness with this beautiful sound. And I close my eyes, and it's like a symphony, like the most beautiful symphony orchestra playing a holy melody of God. And it was so beautiful. And from that moment on, that sound of God never left me. It was always with me. It's like God's presence, God's voice, always with me. That returning wave. And some students will describe that they're like, oh, I didn't realize I've been hearing that the whole time and I didn't know it was there. Or they'll suddenly start hearing it a few years later after studying, because the master will reconnect them with that sound current. Because there's a descending wave, which is this light and sound that comes from the Godhead, and when it hits the grand division, it splits into rays. A light, dark, different frequencies, and so forth. But that's the descending wave of souls coming down into reincarnation. But then you have the returning wave of the sound current, which is where soul, through out-of-body travel, is riding the sound and the light with the master's help and out-of-body travel to return to God. And it's a process, but it is magnificent. It's a blessing. Many people today are having out-of-body experiences and experiencing NDEs. But one of the things that is an issue is that not everybody is able to identify where they are when they leave their body. Because what happens is there are regions in the astral plane that can mimic the God worlds. Like, for example, you can see a sparkling ocean and have a sense of great love in the astral plane, but that may be in the astral plane and the first step moving towards these higher and higher levels. So it's like a process. Or that someone may visit the God worlds, but they have to become established there.
Before Ellen died, and that he had a dying wish, what was that dying?
We had, for many years, we had exactly 70 students, 70, 71, or 72 students in VARDANKAR. We didn't care about numbers, but many of our students were having this magnificent connection with God. They were having blessings in their life that were like a miracle, that were like the love of God coming into their lives. They were leaving their bodies. They were hearing the sound and seeing the light. They were meeting these masters out of body, and it felt like their life was like a living blessing. But the thing that, when Alanji was very, very sick, one of the things he said to me, and I felt the same, was he could see on the inner planes, he could see thousands of individuals. Not the masses are not ready for this. He could see thousands of individuals who he could see that they were waiting, that they wanted to return to God. They wanted to find the things that our students were enjoying, that we were experiencing, but they couldn't find us. No matter how hard we tried, and no one could find us. It was always stayed at 71, 72 people. And he felt bad. It wasn't that he failed in a conventional way, like, people that are on YouTube that want a lot of viewers. What it really was that he felt pain that he failed them, because they wanted this love and they wanted this help. They wanted what we had, and they couldn't find us. And he said, I failed them. He said, I feel like a failure. And I said, I feel that way too. I felt like a failure, and because no one could find us. And there's a sea of teachers and people and books, and no one could find us. And so he died feeling like a failure. But then after he died, I had some out of body experiences that showed me something, that showed me the future related to that, and it startled me. Well, what happened was, I believe it was about New Year's Eve. You know, it was just a difficult time because it was like one of the first holidays where Alan was gone. The house was empty. It was like you could. At first, it was really loud because there were neighbors blasting music everywhere. but but it was like for days the house. You know, it was just so quiet, and Alan was gone, and I lost my friends. I lost my house. I felt pain, and I said, you know what? I'm just gonna spend the whole holiday spending time with Alan in heaven. so so we I would contemplate and meet him in heaven, and he would comfort me. And at one point, I don't know how many what day this was, but at one point I was feeling sad, and there was a letter I'd written, and I was asking Alan G in heaven about this letter. And I said, because it was talking about the future. And to my shock, the letter itself, because I was in multiple layers of heaven at the same time. They call it dual awareness. I was in the super physical level with Alan, the astral, but also the higher levels such as the Anami lock and so forth. And what happened was, all of a sudden, the letter, it just transformed. It became enormous, and it became like a portal, like an interdimensional portal. And in the next moment, as pure soul, I flew through the letter into the future. And I was, it was, I mean, I don't know if I'd call it like time travel, but it was like the Vardan Vidya opened up, and I could see my future. And in this future, I saw that many of those people that wanted so badly to find us had found us, and that there were many of them sitting at we were having a seminar, a worldwide seminar, and they were sitting there at the seminar, but then it zoomed into one of the people sitting and he had in his eyes there were tears of joy, because his prayers were answered. He wanted to become closer to God, and he was using out of body travel and experiencing different ways of being closer to God. And he had tears of joy because he was very happy. And when I saw that, I was very happy because I said, and at the event I said, Alan, you're not a failure. You gave them the love that they were looking for. He didn't die a failure because he gave them the love that they were looking for. And all the hard work and suffering he went through was not in vain. Because he put so much love, he gave the students so much divine love. And he was in so much pain, but he kept going no matter what. And he is just a magnificent, loving being. But he put a tremendous amount of love. There were times when he was literally on his way to the hospital to get surgery, and he was writing discourses for the students because he wanted them to have what they needed. He didn't want them to be without it. And it's the divine love is it's really the love of God for the individual that comes through the master, the ancient one. So it's not just him, it's divine spirit too.
So I just have a question. Why do some souls like your husband choose to go so early?
That's a question I asked myself. I wanted him to stay a lot longer. We were married for a number of years, but I wanted him to stay longer. Well, what it is usually before we're born, everything is planned out. Divine spirit, I mean, some people, they plan things out with angels or lords of karma. In my path, we planned it out with the ancient ones and with God. And there's a reason for everything. It's sort of like he was destined to leave at that. He knew when he was going to die, but since he had dyslexia, he saw his age in reverse. So he thought it was 10 years later. So, because the numbers were in reverse. And that was also, I guess, to protect him, you know, to not really know, but know, sort of. And yeah, so he was meant to translate at that time. But even when somebody dies, they're not gone. So because he's in heaven now, and he's with me all the time, and he's with our students all the time. They're like, "Hi, Alan." He's there when we give initiations. He's like doing good. He's there. you know.
So what has been the most important life lesson you've learned in this life?
The most important. Wow, that's a big question. The most important life lesson was to every person has in within them, their heart will call them to do something. The heart will call them, and other people and situations will pressure them not to, will try to steer them in another direction. But when you follow that inner call, whatever it is, no matter how subtle it is, and you don't let all the noise and distractions of the lower worlds take you from it, it'll bring you places, magnificent places you never imagined were possible. For me, that inner call was finding God. I was a God seeker, and I had to follow that, and I had to pursue it, and I had to read, and I had to study, and it was worth it. Yeah.
So always follow your heart.
Yeah, yeah.
Any final message you want to give to the audience?
Every individual, no matter who they are, is loved by God. Every person is loved by God, and no matter how imperfect we are in the body, no matter how many mistakes that we've made, no matter what path we practice, no matter what planetary race we're from, that God sees behind the costume, that divine essence, that amazing being that has extraordinary abilities that people are only beginning to understand. And the cycle that we're entering right now, that's going to be able to come out for people. But in order for them to do that, they have to pass certain tests that the negative power in God is giving. They have to prove that they're responsible with wielding this great power they have inside, meaning our thoughts, our actions, our creations. We will experience our own creations. And so not a lot of people don't grasp the fullness of that, the importance of that. And if people are going to be able to survive this time of spiritual testing, they have to become more spiritually mastered, and they have to become more spiritually responsible. Otherwise, they may not be able to make it through this difficult, as you could say, like the earth is giving birth to a greater state of consciousness. For them to pass into that greater state, they have to pass certain tests and trials and tribulations. And that requires developing a finer inner ear and inner eyes of soul to see and hear what God is sharing with us. If anyone wants to find out more, they can see we have a YouTube channel for VARDANKAR, and we also have a website.